I mean, according to the survivors, that they would just do this stuff for fun and laugh and stuff. And then they had Dr. Mendele, who was doing tests on twin kids to like poison and do all sorts of sinister stuff with the kids. And if one kid died, then he would immediately kill his twin, and then they would do simultaneous autopsies so that they could see the exact effects of certain things. He was trying to see if how turn people's eyes blue to make them like Aryans, you know. So then, but he would just make them go blind, and he would try blood transfusions, experimenting with that, you know, and killing a bunch of people with that, and sterilization and all sorts of stuff. I mean, and really cynical stuff, sinister stuff too. Like this, he sewed two 4-year-old twins' backs together until they died, and then just let them wail and moan in their pus while they died until they died. But you know, the question that you would ask yourself is like, how could that have happened? You know, how could you get a whole group of people to actually be that evil? And I think one thing about the museum and about people visiting it and about that happening that you could, I guess, turn into a good thing, turn into a positive thing, is to just remind ourselves that humanity is capable of doing that. But not just that. What makes it so that can happen, and what can you do to prevent something like that from happening again? Well, I think the whole cause of the whole extermination process, the Holocaust. I mean, people hated Jews, and it wasn't just the Germans. It was like the Czechs. I mean, the Slovakians. They had I think their president and their vice president or something. Two of the guys way up on the top. I think, yeah, it was the president and vice president. Were both Catholic priests in Slovakia. And they were actually paying the Germans 500 Slovakian dollars per Jew to get their Jews out of there. You know, saying that Jews were like lazy and, you know, good for nothings. And the Germans didn't like him because, well, I think because the Jews were doing well financially over there, and the Germans got jealous, and they didn't consider the Jews to be the proper original inhabitants of that land, and they were just like a parasite race who were just living, you know, in all these different countries, just like taking over and not, you know, kind of like the gypsies, not, you know, since they didn't have their own country, then they weren't worthy of having their own country, and so they should just be killed, and because Germany was the land of the Germans. And I mean, the Nazi Party themselves, and, well, Adolf Hitler, who I guess brainwashed a bunch of them, Nazis, into following him, was crazy. He was completely insane. He was not well up in the head. I mean, and he was Austrian, and I guess maybe he had some bad experiences with Jews or something as a kid, because he hated Jews. He talked about how he wanted to kill all the Jews, you know, and have their bodies rot in the central square of every town until the putrefaction got so bad that they had to take the bodies down and then replace them immediately with more dead. I mean, just like he wanted to humiliate him as much as possible. And I think maybe another reason that they didn't like Jews is because I think like Catholics and people wanted to get revenge on Jews for killing Jesus Christ. Like they thought Jews were evil because of that. I mean, this is back in the 40s when people were kind of, you know, ignorant and fundamentalist and all this stuff. But I think the main reason is that when people get desperate, they find a scapegoat. And back in the late 30s, you know, and early 40s, the whole world was in a depression, and especially Germany. They got a raw deal in the Treaty of Versailles, and they were owed a lot of money, and they were just not doing well, and so they just wanted to blame the Jews for it. And I guess, yeah, so I guess One reason is, yeah, if you get financially desperate enough, you'll go nuts and like take drastic measures and lose your head. So, but I think I actually think that's like a good sign for us, because we live in a world where we're not going to be desperate. I mean, I don't think we're going to kill the environment and become desperate like that financially. I think we're fine. You know, you can move back in with your mom and live in your mama's basement and do the internet all day and have fun, you know, and eat Cheerios, and you know, people may make fun of you and stuff, but you're never going to be desperate. You're always going to have a good life, and so you're never going to turn to be like evil and want to kill, you know, blacks or something. But that. But it's like, how could the actual concentration camp thing actually go? Like, how could you get people to actually go along with you? And all those people, because I think they employed like 6,000 Germans in Auschwitz to administer the 90,000 people who were inmates in Auschwitz II, which was very large, and then there were a whole bunch in Auschwitz I. And they didn't have any remorse when it was done. I mean, Mendele got away, died in Brazil in '79 as an old man from a stroke while swimming. And then they interviewed another guy I saw on YouTube, asked him if he had any remorse, and he said, no, not at all. I mean, you do what you got to do, right? You know, it was either me or them or whatever, you know. And he's like, yeah, I mean, one side of me thought that it was bad what we were doing, but the other side thought that they deserved it because they were Jews, you know. And then the guy who administered Auschwitz in the beginning, who lived there with his wife, who loved it there and wanted to live their whole life, at the end, right before they hung him there, they asked him if there was anything he regretted, you know, maybe expecting him to say, oh, yeah, I shouldn't have killed so many Jews. He said, yeah, I should have spent more time with my family, you know. So it's like, how could they have gotten all those Germans to do that and not have any remorse and actually to go along with it? Well, I guess if they feel desperate enough, it's like a us versus them thing. But then the Germans below them, like who weren't totally Nazi, a lot of the Germans they got to watch over and like give the food out and like supervise all of those were actually already German prisoners, like German common criminals. And I mean, you know, common criminals are bad people anyway, so they probably didn't really care that much about the Jews. And it was either them starving to death like the Jews, and they did starve them to death. I mean, you see the bodies and they're totally emaciated. Didn't feed them all day long. And, you know, by the people at the end of the line would barely get anything to eat, and the people at the end of the line, at the end of the day, wouldn't get anything to eat. So a lot of people literally starved to death, starved until they died. The people who worked, the people who they had working. And I mean, and to prove that, you know, if anybody thought that that's just an exaggeration, they did have starvation chambers in one of those rooms in the basement that I saw, where they would, you know, somebody who they didn't like or whatever, put him in the starvation chamber and just leave him there until they were dead. And so, yeah, they were literally starving them to death. When they rescued them, you know, they were weighing like 25 kilos and stuff, and they had a photo of one woman who weighed 25 kilos. And so it was like, it was either them, either those German, you know, if a German supervisor wasn't doing his job or being brutal enough, then he would become one of the ones who has to, one of the lower ones, and they'd just replace him. And then he'd be starving to death. And also the ones who were like hauling bodies around, and the ones who administered it, they were killed anyway. They were kept working for a couple of weeks and then they were killed. So there was a turnover rate for them too. But yeah, it makes you think, like, how can you get people to go along with that? You know, there's that saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And in Auschwitz, they did have absolute power over anybody. Like, I mean, you could just kill somebody, put a bullet to their head, and it was like whatever. And